Just start moving forward.
Earlier this year, I showed you the TWIKE 3 I bought. This is my TWIKE, the silly two-seater electric car you can pedal. I rebuilt the battery in that TWIKE and then told you everything you needed to know about the TWIKE 3. Well, after those two videos came out, I got an email from Martine at TWIKE saying, if you ever find yourself in Germany, come visit us. Well, guess what? I'm in Germany. Wo jeder Deutsch spricht, aber ich nicht. This is the TWIKE 3. I had one of these.
I don't want to die in Germany in a TWIKE.
And this is the TWIKE 4 XP, a one-off experimental prototype built specifically for the Automotive X Prize in 2010.
Sometimes a little bit scary.
Yeah.
And then this is the TWIKE 5. Well, some of it. I'm at the TWIKE headquarters in Rosenthal, Germany, a village so quiet, picturesque, and idyllic, it looks like this town was made up by a movie set designer. This is TWIKE's headquarters. It fits in perfectly with this, listen to the birds chirping, idyllic and serene village. And it's absolutely covered in solar panels. And this is ostensibly a car factory, remember? I think I would describe this as an artisanal car factory. Anyway, back to the cars. This is where all the German-built TWIKEs, after they moved out of Switzerland, were built. And this is where all the TWIKE 5s will be built. For example, here's a TWIKE 3 right here. It was built in this very building. This specific one is TWIKE's TWIKE. This is the one owned by the company. This is their demonstration vehicle. I looked, it has 22,000 kilometers on it. It was built in 2014, again, right here in this building behind me. And it's a little bit different from the TWIKE that I had that was Swiss built.
Oh, this one feels a little bit faster than mine did. I don't know if it's a change of configuration or just all in my head. We're driving in the rain in a TWIKE in Germany.
First of all, if you're not familiar with the TWIKE that I used to own, go watch that video now and then come back here. This TWIKE, despite being 16 years newer than the TWIKE that I had and being built in a totally different country, is still quite similar to the TWIKE that I had, but there are some differences. The most obvious visual difference is obviously the headlights, the front fascia area. The headlights are different. They're quad headlights instead of dual square headlights, and the blinkers on most of them are right here, but for some reason on this one, the blinker is back here, and these are little plastic black chunks.
This feels exactly as stable in the steering as my TWIKE did, which is to say, pretty twitchy.
This one is also equipped with the option that I mentioned in the video that I made with my TWIKE, passenger car tires. Mine had moped tires on the back. This has 135 width passenger car tires, which will be much easier to source for replacements. And apparently they're more stable as well.
Oh, there's all kinds of trash on the road. Hitting a little twig in this thing is like hitting a giant pothole.
The battery in this one, I don't know what the capacity is, but it is the same style of battery that I took out of my TWIKE. And yes, that means there is no BMS on this battery. Martine, the head of TWIKE, is confident that this system is robust and they've never had any issues. It works for them, so this battery doesn't have a BMS.
We're gonna pedal now. The pedaling mechanism on this one feels a little bit quieter.
On my TWIKE, I complained about the polycarbonate canopy because if you use the windshield wiper, you're going to scratch the crap out of that polycarbonate windshield. Well, polycarbonate is not allowed for use in windshields in Germany, so this one has a glass canopy. TWIKEs built for Switzerland and the US have plastic canopies like mine did, but in Germany, they have glass canopies that are in two halves with a big seam running straight down the middle where the windshield wiper sits.
Forget the Cybertruck, this is the silliest wiper I've ever seen. I have no idea how to park it in the middle.
This one has a couple optional extras that mine didn't have as well, like a fully carpeted interior, including the rear storage compartment back here, and a Blaupunk stereo system in a TWIKE. Unfortunately, not all the changes between my TWIKE and this TWIKE are for the better. Mine had, for the window defrosters, literal hair dryers zip tied to the dash. This has regular car part resistive heaters, and that is such a downgrade that all the character's gone now. Bring back the hair dryers, TWIKE.
All right, I gotta hear it. What do the not hair dryer defrosters sound like? Basically the same.
The taillights are different on the newer models. Mine had aftermarket LED taillights for some reason that looked terrible, but stock, it would have had a little rectangular taillight module on either side and then a reverse light and a fog light. These have, well, what you see here.
The wildest thing about Germany I've found so far is that this tiny road has a speed limit of 60 miles an hour. I love Germany.
By and large, though, this is the same as the TWIKE 3 that I had, just with a few changes here and there.
Let's see if the horn is as loud in this one as it was in mine. Oh! Yep. Yes, it is.
And now for the bad news, and something that I was wrong about in my original TWIKE video. In my original TWIKE video, I said you could still buy these new because they were still building them. I was wrong. They stopped building these about 3 years ago to focus on the TWIKE 5. But more on that in a second.
I've made it! I have now driven a TWIKE 3 in Rosenthal.
This is the TWIKE 3. This is, well, it's not really the TWIKE 4. This is the TW4XP, the TWIKE 4X Prize. This is the only one that has and will ever exist. It was built specifically to compete in the Automotive X Prize in 2010. Last year I showed you the Illuminati 7, another car that was built specifically to compete in the Automotive X Prize. 7 and the TWIKE 4XP competed in the same competition, together, right alongside each other. They were in different classes, but they're still in the same competition. And it is so cool, and this is so much more interesting than I thought it was. Now these two, the TWIKE 3 and the TWIKE 4, both are called TWIKE. They both have 3 wheels. They were both built in this building behind me, but they are nothing alike at all. Unlike 7, this was built to compete in one of the alternative classes in the X Prize, so it only had to have 2 seats, it only had to have 3 wheels, and the range target was only 100 miles, unlike the 7, which had to go 200 miles and have 4 seats, etc., etc. This was built specifically to the X Prize requirements, so the battery and motor are the minimum necessary. The battery capacity is the minimum necessary to achieve 100 miles or 160 kilometers of range, and the motor power is the minimum necessary to achieve a top speed of 120 kilometers an hour.
Behaving the road.
Where do I even begin with the absurdity of this thing? Let's start with the battery. The TWIKE 3 already had a very silly high voltage for the battery pack. Mine had a 3.5 kilowatt hour from factory battery that was at 350 volts, which is just crazy high for that small of a capacity. This has a 750 volt battery pack. And remember, this was completed in 2010. This may be the first, or at least one of the first, 800 volt class EVs. And the capacity of the battery is about 17 kilowatt hours. He couldn't remember exactly for certain. They sized the battery specifically to hit the minimum range requirement of 100 miles.
The battery was a little bit too small, and that was also the reason why we couldn't speed in the last race.
Yeah.
Because we made everything to be efficient, and to be in the consumption goal, but not in the speed goal again. That was not clear to us.
With such a high voltage battery, especially in the late 2000s, what did they use for a motor inverter? Well, the inverter that they found to work with this voltage was from a wind turbine. Specifically, it's the inverter to control the motor that pitches the blades on a wind turbine. That's what is in this thing. And it's not just the motor inverter, it's also the charger. Just like the TWIKE 3, this has a charger inverter. Now, what do they use for a motor? This is just the coolest part, I think. The drive unit in a Lucid Air is a work of art. The rotor is hollow in the middle because it's a permanent magnet motor. They made it hollow. They increased the diameter a little bit, and that's where the differential in a Lucid Air drive unit lives, inside the motor rotor. The motor that TWIKE picked for this thing is some sort of industrial bench power motor, and the way they were describing it to me, this thing must be massive, because when he was describing this thing, his hands went about this far apart. And the rotor in this motor is hollow. So guess where they put the differential? In the rotor. This has a hollow rotor with the differential inside of it. Now, the way the Lucid Air drive unit is set up is you have a small differential on the low torque side inside the rotor, and then on both sides of the motor is a planetary gearbox, one for each side. Now, the hollow rotor in this one is quite a bit bigger, which means they had room for a full fat differential in the middle. Specifically, the differential from a Smart 4.2, because this thing is essentially a scrap bin special. And there's no gearbox at all. It's direct drive from the differential in the middle of the rotor to the wheels.
Oh, that's a smell.
Smell that? Great.
I'm glad it's open so we can smell it and it'll dissipate quickly.
Because the motor is direct drive and there's no gearbox in the middle to give you any sort of torque advantage, you might think that motor's got to be pretty torquey, right? Yeah, the power rating is only about 17 kilowatts nominal, but the torque rating is about 500 newton meters, which is this much in pound-feet. It feels like we're doing 100 already.
Feels like, yeah.
This whole drivetrain is just wild to me and so far ahead of its time. And remember, they essentially just used whatever parts they could find. The wheels, suspension hub, and all of these components over here, these are from a Mini. You might even recognize these wheels from a Mini. The chassis is all aluminum, much more substantive and heavier than a TWIKE 3, and then the body is carbon fiber, but this is not exposed carbon fiber. This is just a carbon fiber effect wrap. What they tell me is they were running out of time. They had to finish the car for the X Prize, and whoever was in charge of making the body put it in the autoclave for too long or screwed something up, and the body came out all wrinkly. But because they were running out of time, they had to work with it. So to make it presentable, the body is mostly body filler that's been smoothed out. And this unfortunately added quite a bit of weight as well. Speaking of weight, they tell me this weighs about 680 kilograms, which is not all that heavy, but it's so much heavier than they were expecting it to be, and a lot heavier than a TWIKE 3.
Is this just what German roads look like on a Saturday?
It's a side road here.
Another issue they had with the body is they didn't have time to do proper aerodynamic modeling or analysis on this thing. And they tell me that their biggest disappointment with this was the efficiency, and it's almost entirely because of aerodynamics. This body may look streamlined, but it really isn't. For steering in the TWIKE 3, you have one of these handles as a steering tiller in the middle. You move it side to side to steer the TWIKE around. This may look like that, but it's actually completely different. To steer this, it has twin stick steering. This is how you steer the TW4XP. Just like in the TWIKE 3, this is your throttle and this is your regen. But unlike in a TWIKE 3, these are not two-stage buttons. This is an infinitely variable throttle and infinitely variable regen. You know, like you would expect with the car.
The road here is a little bit windy.
Yeah.
You know, and on the other side it's a good test for an unstable situation.
And also, like in the TWIKE 3, basically all of your controls are done through hand inputs. This is your steering, your throttle, or your regen. There's some other buttons over here that I don't know what they do, and then you've got your horn lights, blinkers, and wiper over on this side. There's also some buttons in the middle and some various gauges on the center console. The front suspension is inboard. It's got sort of a push rod style suspension, and you can watch this move around as you're going down the road. It's so cool to watch this. But probably the biggest departure from the TWIKE 3 and just being a TWIKE in general is the pedal situation. It doesn't have pedals. This is sadly not a car you can pedal. It only has a single brake pedal, which looks really funny, only having one pedal down there, but again, your throttle's controlled by your fingers. But also, because it doesn't have pedals, it means this isn't true. Yeah, I get it. TWIKE's thing is to have pedals and it'd be a human-electric hybrid, but this one isn't. They wanted to add pedals to this thing, probably to drive a generator or something, but they simply did not have enough time. They needed to get this thing finished for the X Prize, and they just decided to do without pedals because they didn't have the time to add them. But probably the coolest thing about the TW4XP is that not only does it still work, they still use it regularly. This thing was built in a hurry for a competition in 2010, and it still works. They take customers for demo rides in this thing. Their standard procedure is to take them on a loop in a TWIKE 3, bring them back, and then take them on the same loop in this. Of course, when they do finally have a TWIKE 5 prototype that they can give proper customer demo rides in, they're going to finally retire this. And then this is the TWIKE 5. This is patently obvious, but I'll say it anyway. This is just a chassis development prototype with no body on it. The 5 is the TW4XP evolved into a car that's producible in volumes higher than 1. The first question I had when I got here, because they've been talking about the TWIKE 5 for years, and they stopped producing the TWIKE 3 about 3 years ago to focus on this. So my question was, what's taking them so long? But I found out when I got here how small TWIKE is. The employees at TWIKE is only 10 people, plus another roughly 20 people in contractors and suppliers and such. TWIKE is very small, and designing and engineering a car like this takes a ton of effort, so that's why it's taking so long. And now this is just some of a prototype, so I can't tell you everything about this because a lot of it is bound to change, but a few of the things I can tell you are the batteries and motors, which are not going to change. The TWIKE 3, TWIKE's only other production car, had a 3 kilowatt nominal electric motor. This motor is capable of 150 kilowatts, just a little bit of a jump. Now, it won't actually produce 150 kilowatts in this car because it's limited by the battery. They told me that the nominal power rating that they're advertising for this motor is 45 kilowatts with a peak of 70 kilowatts, which is still just so quick. This thing, because of how light it is just phenomenally fast. The battery, which sits under the seats from about here to here, like a normal EV, is going to be 40 kilowatt hours. It's 40 kilowatt hours in this one, and they say that that's going to be the launch configuration as well. And their target consumption figure is just 7.2 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, which is 8.6 miles per kilowatt hour. If that's true, which seems like an awful lofty goal, then this 40 kilowatt hour battery should be good for 340 miles of range. Just like the TW4XP, this has twin stick steering, and all of your controls are up on the handles as well. It also has pedals, but we'll get to that in a second. Which means this is a car capable of 100 miles an hour with no steering wheel. That's right, this has pedals. Unlike the TW4XP, they went back to this having pedals. But unlike the TWIKE 3, where the pedals are directly driving the rear wheels through a 5-speed bicycle gearbox, this is driving a generator. This is an EV that you can charge by pedaling it. Now, are you doing much by pedaling it? Absolutely not. They say this generator is capable of about 300 watts of output if you're a particularly strong individual, so you might be able to pedal enough to offset the headlights, but it's more about the activity of doing something with your feet while you're driving on long distances. An automotive expert tried to persuade them to just get rid of the whole pedal thing because really it's not much more than a gimmick, and it adds costs and it adds complexity, but it's TWIKE. They needed some TWIKE things in it. The twin stick steering and the pedals, that makes it a TWIKE. That adds character, and it gives you something to do while you're driving it. And just like in the TWIKE 3, this is also the brake pedal. By backpedaling, you actuate the master cylinder. Although unlike the TWIKE 3, there's only 2 stop positions. You can use either your left or the right foot, and this is the position for maximum leverage, so you then end up crashing like I did in my TWIKE 3. The rear suspension is not independent. It's all connected by one giant tube in the middle there, but the motor is sitting independent of the suspension and connected via CV shaft. Other things, the heating in this thing, for maximum efficiency, they will have a resistive heater, a very small one, but they're going to rely more on the heated seat, the heated handle grips, and the simplest form of heat scavenging for the motor that I've ever seen. This is the heat exchanger for the motor cooling system. It has a reversible fan behind it, so if it's hot outside, it will suck air out of the cabin through this heat exchanger to cool the motor off. But if it's cold outside, to get a little bit of free heat into the cabin, the fan will reverse direction and draw air from the outside in through this heat exchanger, where it'll warm up just a little bit to help heat up the cabin for free heat. And in addition to that, they'll have a 1.8 kilowatt resistive heater for the cabin and a windshield defroster. Now, there's lots of details that I can't share with you because they just don't know yet. They haven't decided. They're still working out the engineering and design of this thing. They also don't know how much it'll cost, how many they'll make, when it'll go in production. There's a lot of unknowns because, again, it's a really small team here. Now, this chassis prototype, it isn't road legal, so I definitely have not been for a ride in this thing on the road. I have absolutely not experienced 150 kilometers an hour in this thing. I have no idea how surprisingly stable it feels despite only having 3 wheels. I have no idea how insanely quick it is because of the power to weight ratio. And I absolutely did not have an absolute blast because, of course, I never rode anywhere in this thing. That would be illegal. And that's the TWIKE 5, or at least what it will be, hopefully. If you view the TWIKE 5 concept from the perspective of TWIKE, then it represents TWIKE going mainstream. But if you view it from any other perspective, it's such an unusual idea for a car. It's exactly how I'd imagine a car built by TWIKE would look. And that's what I love about TWIKE. They do things their own way, and if it doesn't interest you, that's totally fine. TWIKEs are not for everybody. The TWIKE 5, assuming it makes it to production, is going to be relatively expensive, relatively low production, and appeal to a very niche audience. TWIKE is such an honest grassroots car company. I really hope they continue to succeed because we need more car companies like this. Anyway, thanks to TWIKE for inviting me to their headquarters here in a small town in Germany to experience various TWIKEs in their natural habitat and to get a better understanding for what the whole TWIKE thing is all about. And thanks to you for watching.
Can I take this home with me?